How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Eulero Gonzalez here. So, let's take a look now at the rendering logic section 2. So, I'll be right back. I'm gonna drink a little bit of water, and there you got it. All right, back to business. And to understand how do I get here with the CSS is to first explore the CSS course made by Josh Kummer, a SWE that previously worked at Khan Academy and then at Gatsby. So after that, he launched this applications it launched 3 courses: CSS for JavaScript developers, the joy of React, and the whimsical animations. So first is this CSS for JavaScript developers, and the TLDR of how do I get here on this rendering logic is by first look at the fundamentals in CSS, which is what is CSS, and how you can now include CSS in your document, whether it's an external style sheet, internal, or inline, and the tools that allow to apply those CSS styles to our elements via selectors or pseudo selectors, right? As well as the add rules that indicate is how CSS will behave in certain conditions. And so, for example, on keyframe, this is the behavior that I define, right? Or the set of rules that I want you to go with. That is used on animations. So when you detect now a viewport of this particularly width, I want you to now apply this set of rules via the media query. And then you also have the view transition and the add layers, which again, it applies, it holds this set of rules to apply when you need to select them. So why this is important and relevant in 2025, as well as understanding the function that come up with the CSS, like calc or cramp, scale, among other functions, and the shorthand property of the box model, and how you comment here. All of these are the fundamental things that we need to understand in CSS, and what are the things that are still relevant in 2025, 2026, is that first, you need to understand what a CSS rule is, the anatomy of that, and certain specific things on the web development. First, the media query. Why do we even care about media query? When can we use the media query? The use cases, as well as a specific selector. Despite that we have all of these build tools out there that help us now is to combine is JavaScript in CSS and vice versa, but still it is important to understand, which is the pseudo selectors like hover and focus. When can we use that, especially the focus? And this is part of the web content accessibility guidelines, which is a set of principles that make your web content accessible to wider audience by stand on 4 principles. So it is perceivable, is this understandable, is this operable, and if this robust, right? And then the pseudo classes, right? So the pseudo classes, as I mentioned, like the hover and the focus, as well as the first and last end of child and end of type, that is still useful in CSS when you want to dynamically generate his layouts or several blocks. Okay, and the pseudo elements like placeholders and before and after that is heavily used on decorations, and then understand the units that we can have in CSS: pixels, percentage, and root element. Why we use root elements, useful for typography when some users might have trouble, have vision impairments. Then they can zoom in and zoom out the content without modifying the layout, and that's why we use pixels to only specify that for the layout, not for fonts. And percentage, when you want to now, is dynamically pass down or inherit some of this dimension of the box model. Again, something that I'm going to explain in today's video. Also, the color theory, which is what are the different color formats that we have available in CSS, like the keywords that is used for educational purpose, the hash or the hexadecimal, the RGB, which is a way of how you can make sense of this color format from the hexadecimal. But now a more intuitive one, which is the HSL, which say, hey, by using is now a huge, which describe is the color in a ring, and the lightness or saturations, aka how true color is, or how gray scale or how gray out is this color. This something that help us to get some nuanced colors. But if you want to now work with colors that work not only with true colors, but how humans perceive color. This is when again, this is go a little bit beyond of the scope of today's video. I just want to mention that because that's something that exists, the OGLAP, right? And I am not make this up. OGLAP color picker, right? Or OG, OK, LCH, right? So for example here, how now you can actually see if a particular color is, and the representation of that color unavailable for any small devices. Interesting. In chroma, right? So again, its follow is the same, huge lightness, but something now changed here, which is the chroma. Show 3D, right? To represent is where it's going to locate that element, right? And show rec to 2020. But again, as you can see, is now lightning is moving across this color, and if I shift the color from right to left, or from red, let me put it here, this color, something like this, right? How do I detect now if a color is true? You see how lightness actually change, and this is not. And this is something that our eyes is trying to compensate, bro. You know, this is what the eye is trying to compensate, right? So when you see something red or green, right, the true color of this, as well as the chroma, right? So to indicate that this is now the true color, right? And you're trying to change from one color to another, right? So here is where you can start to play with all of these different colors, right? So in any case, again, this is something that I need to later on dive deep into. This is also part of the how do you put it? I think Mozilla is here. monochromer. Well, in any case, the idea is because now humans perceive color different than true mathematical colors. This is why they come up with this, right? And easily for us developers and designers to pick up the right color at that moment. Now, I mentioned that as part of the fundamental things that we need to know, and also is the typography. So things like font family, which is a set of characters that come with um, 6 font weight and 2 variants in the case of Roboto, right? So 6 font weight like ultra thin, thin, regular, bold, heavy bold, and also something another one, and the 2 variants, that is the italic and bold. So these 2, bold represent is, hey, this is some important thing that you need to be aware of in the text. And italic is when you want to represent is foreign words or TV and books titles, or perhaps you want to show the what a character is thinking of, right? And another is the web fonts. So in order to provide this branding experience for your products, a lot of those big brands actually hire developers and designers to develop and to make this unique experience, to craft this unique experience. So in other words, for example, in the case of Airbnb, the Airbnb, right? So Airbnb, here it used now the cerulean, as you can see here, right? They have that particularly font, all right, known as cerulean. This is a color. It is ceruleal color font, or what is the font family name of Airbnb? Montserrat. Ceruleal is this one, is the ceruleal. So anytime that you get in that application, and see that particular font, you say, oh, this is part of this product, the branding. Okay, so far so good, because here is when I also look at the fonts, the type of fonts, whether it is the sans serif or serif, and one is helpful for reading. So sans serif, it don't have any decoration. Sans serif, that's what the name come from French, and the other is serif for adding some decoration to your text, right? So the other is the things that you can do with the text. So text transformation from uppercase to lowercase, text transform, text alignment, line height, and letter spacing. All of this is just the fundamental things in CSS that we need to know. So now what is relevant, so all the things that we need to know, all the things that I need to know, and the things that are relevant in 2025. All right. So because of that, now as we explore about is how do we get here with CSS, is because traditionally this was meant to only be authorized to design is block of content, not layouts. And since the vast majority of browsers, they implement their own look and feel of each one of those inputs and HTML elements here, like the inputs or buttons, select, checkboxes, radar buttons, and so on and so forth, right? Now, um, designers and developers needs to have a common place where all of these browsers with all of their subtle nuances needs to be on the same page where we can start building this kind of application known as the CSS reset. So because as the year goes and now most of those browsers are stick to the CSS spec, uh, most of them follow this common look and feel of all of these UI elements. But some of them, there's still some there's still some gaps in how they implement. For example, is the boxes, or how they now select, or what are the dimensions or the layout of these particular elements. Uh, so because one thing that you can do, especially as you create your CSS resets and all of this kind of stuff, is that you can now pass some of this property, usually text-based content or property values, down the children. This is known as the inheritance, right? And also you can be explicit about it. Hey, I want to inherit this value from its parents. So when you have now competing CSS class here, or CSS declarations, the way how that is solved is via the cascading style sheet, which is an algorithm that determines how this competing CSS is going to be resolved. It's going to be applied at the end of the document. So the further you fall into this cascade, which is the series of a stage, the less likely is for that style to be applied. So the first stage is, hey, if this CSS rule is important or is part of the transform, or it is a normal statement. The other is the location. Is this on the application level or the user level or on the browser? Then you have is the specificity of these selectors, whether it's by ID or if it's a class name or a attribute base or a pseudo element, or if this is an element or a pseudo elements. And the last but not least is the order in which these style sheets appear. So the closer it appears at the top of the CSS files, the more likely is for that to be applied. Otherwise, it's very less likely to be on the document. So this is to summarize the CSS, right? And after that, all right, then I look at the way of how we can organize our content here, whether it's by a blog or inlines. And because now the web initially served content to Western cultures, now as the years goes by and starting to promote and offer your services across and starting to promote your services and offering their application across different cultures. So the Middle East, in Africa, in Mongolia, Russia, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, Philippines, Malaysia, Australia. So now, well, the challenge is that those cultures read contents quite different. So instead of make the content directions along with it is logical, along with it as a position, let's make this based on a logical content position. So that's why here in the blog and the inline content, in order to determine where you're going to read that content or how this content is going to be displayed, we have now inline, so padding and margins as a way to indicate where are you going to put this content, where are you going to add this margin or padding here. And speaking of that, right, I also look at the way of how you can add or to tell the browser to indicate, for example, is how this content is going to be rendered. For example, if I say this and somehow I say writing mode, right? if I say writing mode, right to left, right? But the thing is this. Oh, let's going to put it here, right? So writing mode is so you have is right to left, all right, or left to right. It might think that it doesn't change anything, right? But if you're starting to say something like this, right? The thing is vertical, right and left, like this, right? So now the content actually changed to now rendering in this specific way. Again, most of the applications they render content in this English style from left to right. So you can have this one, right? To put it that as it is. But I just want to mention that this is something that is possible. It's not widespread. Not all web content show that. Even a lot of these Asian websites, they don't show you that, right? It show you content like this. So for example, Alibaba, all right, where their primary target now. Give it to me in English. Okay. No. Alibaba, but I think it's going to target my browser and show me the content. Yeah, okay. So if for some reason I want to change that to, let's say, Deutsch, French, and English, or here, right? If I want to do this, as you can see, it's showing the text in this way, right? So now even in China, all of these people has now started to read content in this way, right? And I barely understand any of his character. That's a different culture, bro. That's a different culture. Oh my god, I don't know. I don't know what even is this. I don't know what the French toast is even this. You know? But it works, right? So if I change now here to English, right? And then I hit the OK button to English, and then I hit the OK button. I'm assuming that that's okay, or save, right? It's quite interesting because it's only to describe that save they use only 2 characters unlike 4, right? And there you got it, right? So now it makes much more sense, a lot of sense, right? And the same for here. Find suppliers by country and all of this, right? Italy, Turkey, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, okay, Vietnam, Russia, and Thailand. All right, good. Absolutely. So French, absolutely. Okay, now, so this is the writing or the content direction, right? So as we now explore is how this content can be, or how now this content is looked by the CSS. It is based on this box model. So when you read the spec and then describe that any virtual media, and I want to take a look at that, you say, hey, CSS, CSS visual media visual formatting model, as it is. Here is describing is this. So this chapter and the next describe the visual formatting model, how user agent process the document tree for visual media. Visual media like this, what you're looking for. And if you click here, one of the most important features of the style sheet is that we can specify how document is to be presented on different media. How this document is gonna be presented on different media. whether it's on a paper, whether it's on visual elements on a screen, and also speech synthesizers with braille devices. Again, for those who don't have that kind of disability, that doesn't exist. But for those who have them, it is real, man. It is real. So, in other words, so one of the most important feature of this style sheet is that it allows you to specify is the presentations on different medias. Again, on paper, like a PDF, all right? So on paper or on media screen like this, all right? Tablet, iPhones, so iPhones, iPad, tablets, Mac, Apple Vision Pro, so on and so forth. Okay, and also speech synthesizers. I don't know how they do this, but they do. Certain CSS properties are only designed for certain medias, right? So for example, the page break before. On occasion, however, style sheet for different media types may share a property but require different values for that property. So for example, the font size property is useful for both screen and print media. The two media types are different enough to require different values for the common property. A document will will typically need a larger font on a computer screen than on paper. Therefore, it is necessary to express, and this is interesting, a document will typically need a larger font on a computer screen than on paper. Therefore, it is necessary to express that a style sheet or a section of a style sheet apply to certain media types. But again, the TLDR is that now, because this visual formatting model that allows to describe is how the document is going to look like on different medias, whether it's print media or visual medias or screens and even speech synthesizers, right? The way how this visual formatted model works is via box model. So everything here in the CSS is a box. That's why they call this. So the anatomy of this box is made of the content, the padding, the border, and the margin. So you can think of this like when you do a winter walk, all right? And you put, of course, a coat on you, right? So the content you can think that the content is yourself, okay? And the fluffy material, it is the padding. The border is the thin material, the outer thin material, or the outer thin layer, or the outer coat thin layer, right? And then the margin is at least that you have 2 meters of safe space. Okay. Now, the padding has its own way to describe that. Is it its own formatting model? This is the padding. The margin has exactly, and also have its shorthands. The border has a slightly different way to define that, like the padding or the margins. You need to specify is the width, the border, style, and the color. You also have another property known as the outline that is used especially for highlighting something. This is not included in the box model calculation, but it's useful for help users navigate without any point-like device, mouse, or any pointer like. Makes a ton of sense. Okay, make a ton of sense, bro. Jesus. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Good, good. So, um, having said that, then I also look at the margins, and the margins, similar to the padding, I also follow that particular format to describe that. In margins, you can have now negative margins. So in other words, now elements can collapse in each other's, or elements can now overlap in each other's, right? And because this is the box model that it is used on different layout algorithms, because you can think of CSS like a set of mini language that has that is made of. You can think of CSS like a set of mini language. So they each one of those mini languages determine how these elements is going to present, and they're going to put. So how these elements is going to be uh, located on the screen, right? So we have now is the normal flow, the flow layout, the the normal flow, the flow layout is the same. The absolute positioning, like what we're gonna see in today's video, the absolute positioning, uh, and also the flex box, the grid, in what is the another one? Among other layout modes. So right now I'm looking is at the first, at the origin, the OG of all of the layout mode, which is the flow layout, which is made of three type of boxes. So you have now the blocks, takes all the available horizontal space, doesn't line break. You can modify it is dimension, the width and height. The inline, it doesn't allow you to modify it is dimension. It's going to be what the size of the content. It can line break, right? And you also have other type of elements that are part of this inline layout that fit into this layout bucket, inline layout. So image, canvas, and videos, each one of them technically are inline elements, but they also behave like a block. In other words, you can resize its dimensions, but because they are technically inline elements, in this layout they now add some additional space. So you can remove that via line height, for example, or you can is if you have now several of these element of these images, and then you add some space in the markup, it's going to put now this slightly space on all of these image, videos, or canvas, right? To solve that, you just only put all of these elements close to each other with no white space. And the other is the inline elements. So this is like elements behaving like so it is block elements in inline clothing. So in other words, these inline blocks, it allows you to now resize the dimension of these elements, but it's only take but it's on a and also it allows you to line break the contents. So this is the flow layout and the different type of boxes that you can opt into. And then, because the way how now this box is calculated, this is why we look at the width and the height. And the width now have two type of values, whether it's measurement, pixels, percentage, pixels, root m's, or percentage. And the other is the keywords. So with percentage, which is what is more relevant to, it is calculated based on the parent container or the containing block, right? And with the keywords for the feed content is pretty self-explanatory. the mean content say, hey, let me take a look now at the widest children elements, and that'll be my width, right? Whereas the max content is say, hey, I'm gonna take is the smallest elements here, the smallest elements, okay? I'm gonna take is the smallest children elements in a long in the smallest children elements chain it, right? And that'll be is the max content. So this is to summarize is the width, and in the height, which is determined not by its parent but by the children's size. And by default, when you set that to auto, all right, it takes now is only the small. It is a small. By default, the height, it takes the small size as possible. It is the smallest size. So by default, it takes the smallest size as possible. So when you use a percentage, right? Because unlike width that takes look up to the parents, height looks down the tree. And this is why, for example, if you want to now determine is the height, if you want to present content, for example, like this, like the how do you call it? What is this? Like sorry, like holy moly, Jesus, GTA, right? GTA 6, like this one, right? Can I look at Rockstar game? There you go, right? For example, like this. Oh my god, and it takes okay. Okay, but this is now okay. It takes some time to load this. But in any case, if you want to here show you this layout, right? Exactly. If you want to show now this layout here in this content in this orderly fashion, right? One after the another, one element after the another, right? And as you can see, all of this kind of content, right? All of this kind of content. Exactly. All of this kind of content, bro. Is that all right? So if you want to show all of these elements in an orderly way, and especially if you want to show now content that fits the height, like this, right? Right? If you want to show now this image that fits the height here, the thing is that you need to specify at the root of the HTML DOM that say, hey, this is now, so this document, the height of this document, it will be now the entire height of the viewport, and you can inherit that via the height 100%. So now the HTML document is inherit that from the browser, and then you need to pass down to the relevant elements that you're going to go to make that happen. Because now One thing is that what you see here on the browsers, and the other is on mobiles. And mobile has now this extra space of with the address bars and also sometimes the footers. So your content might be taller, and aka you it add this nice it add this light this 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 slide bar here. So if you want to solve that, right? Or whether you now specify is the width at the root element, the height and the root elements, or you can use is the new unit called as a small v unit here. For example, if you say, hey, I want you to now render is this image here, right? At the height of this image will be is now the 100% view small view height, right? And now look at this, it's actually going to fit that to the viewable area. So of course, as you increase that, it displays that more, and so on and so forth, right? That's one of the cool trick of this, right? Yeah, that's one of the cool trick of this, as you can see, right? And this actually is now render that as expected. So if I remove this, right, you see, of course, there is also several CSS rules that they are applied to, but when I set this, is now calculated based on the small viewport size. So if you look that on, if we for example take a look at that on mobile screen here, for example, right? And if we change dimension to this one, so now it'll actually fit the content as it is, right? Like a poster. So you have now the content here as a poster. That's interesting because they actually cut that. That's why they see in this funny way here. So they cut that, and there you got it, right? So they also playing here is with some layers here. But that's the thing of how you can use is this specific unit as it is, right? That's also quite interesting. Anyway, why this is important? Well, because especially if you're going to go for not only creative work like this, but also for anything that rely on print media. So let's say you're gonna take some data out of the. Let's say you have let's say you want to measure is KPI, right? Key performance indicators, and you want to take all of this KPI, right, and then now present that in a print like media, right, in a paper, for example. So it is important for us to understand now how the thing is going to be present, not only on the media, visual media, not only on screens, but also on other type of medias like print media, and the speech synthesizer is another media, but again, only at least these two one. All right, okay. So that was how can I calculate is the width and the height, right? And also it has is the keyword, right, to specify is the mean height, max height, or fit content as well. So after that, another thing that is relevant for the flow layout is the negative margin and the margin collapse, which is only happens on float layout. This indicates is, hey, because the idea is that you might have content side by side and then now overlaps. So this is known as margin collapse. it is pretty simple. It is trace. So the idea here is that you can have is two elements side by side, and they now share that same space. So they collapse. So the idea is pretty simple, but it covers a lot of use cases here that I just want to mention is the most relevant here. So margins can collapse is vertically. The bigger margins will win, and now margin can push content uh, of that. And after that, I look at how can I create is a simple small website without only exclusively using is the flow layout, right? That was quite revealing in terms of how we actually from a lot of these words so make it actions, right? So first thing first is to uh, describe the structure and how the things is gonna look like, uh, the layout, right? And then is when you specify is the decorations and the font size and all that kind of stuff. But first thing first, think of that as the layout first. How this box is going to behave. And also I look at how can we center elements via margins here with auto property. So auto property here is now a hungry value, right? It's taking all the available space. So here I look at how can now I center elements horizontally here. And then finally at the another layout mode, which is the positioning layout. So when you use now, so everything so far has been look at how you can orderly set elements one after the another, and the flow layout do everything they can to avoid overlapping elements. So with this layout mode, we can have now elements occupying the same pixel, the position absolute. So the first in here we have now four type of values, okay, that you can opt in or you can opt out. Okay, we have relative, absolute, fixed, and sticking. And the other is when you want to opt out from this position layout. That is the static or initial. All right. So with relative, when you said that, you might there it might look like there is no different. All right. But it turns out that is doing two stuff. One is set constraint to the children elements, and second, it enable certain CSS properties, top, right, bottom, and left, right? So I think as I see in comparing with margins, now that I can move these elements out of the normal flow, unlike with margins, margins now modify is the layout here, right? In other words, it's modifying its other elements in around that. But with position relative, it does that as well. But we can now take elements out of the normal flow. So this is why I look at the relative, okay, positioning, and then the absolute positioning, which here with the relative positioning, we can now add aligned elements in an orderly fashion, one after the another. We can actually put elements a little bit, but with absolute positioning, we can now put elements out of the normal flow. Why this is useful? Well, when you want to create now things or UI effects like a deck of cards or models, drop downs, or any content that needs to overlap on another one, so absolute position is the way to go, right? So here the because these elements now are because the absolute elements initially you might see that these are elements that are floating all right? The position, it is based on something known as the containing block, right? So by default, it's going to look up the closest containing block if there is no, and that is any element that have an that have a positioning algorithm, all right, or the positioning layout, and that'll be, it is containing block, it is anchor place, right? So with this absolute positioning, you can again enable this top, right, bottom, and left, so you can move that around that. Another cool thing here is that this um, this this layout mode uh, allow us to put elements outside of the flow, all right, collapsing patterns as well. And now what it allow us is to center elements in this theme, in this sticky absolute theme. So you can think that, well, position things, or when you think about the positioning elements, absolute position element is that you want to be this element as small as possible. And you want to put that at any place in your content, right? So because here you can now provide some dimensions to this, and if you don't provide any dimensions to this box, only the top, left, and right properties, right? So for example, in this case, if you don't provide any of the width, right, what you're gonna do is to, well, put this, so put the elements down the, so in this case, it's going to now put the element 15 pixels from the top edge, from the light, from the left edge, from the top and bottom, from vertical edge and horizontal edge, okay, 50%. If you provide now is, for example, a width, of course, now it's set that boundaries to that. But if you want to know that particular box to be in centering in the middle, right? Remember, at the end of the day, here everything is a box, and this particular box, one tricky things to do is to align element is using the margin outer. This only works in this specific layout, right? If you want to center elements there, all right? And if you want to skip, repeat yourself, putting all of these different properties, you can use this, the inset property to go with, right? I mentioned earlier is the containing block. What in the F is the containing block? So the TLDR is that because the absolute positioning elements are now out of the normal flows, and if you want to know where to put these elements, or where these elements are going to be rendered, right, they're going to be contained by the containing block, or they're going to be placed by the containing block, which is determined by its closest positioning element, right? So no matter which closest position element is, if this is relative or static or absolute sticky, as long as that have a position layout, is gonna act as an anchor to the absolute elements. Okay. So if there is indeed no positioning relative, if in this there is no positioning element, if there is no positioning layout element up the tree, well, it turns out that is going to use the initial, or it's going to be used the document as the initial containing block, aka the viewport. However, if you specify that, now it's going to use that as it is, right? You can say, hey, now I want to put that only on top, and I want to now align it to the left. I want you to put here on the left, right? So this box actually is now containing that as a sticky. You can also say absolute. So what would happen if I say, now this is now an absolute, bro? If I say, hey, instead of relative, this is now an absolute. Again, it's going to look up the tree, look up the tree for a closest layout, for a closest positioning layout, and then is going to and that'll be the containing block. So in other words, this element here is going to now put at the top here, along with all of these nested elements here. Let's see if this is true. If I say absolute, right? That's in, oh, it's because block, look at this. That's actually doesn't work as expected. All right. So somehow now this block here is acting like a anchor element here. Position relative. No, exactly. It's because now this block is acting like that, right? So that's interesting, because here is saying, hey, this block, right, is somehow a, oh my god, responsive, responsive. So somehow these elements here, right, so somehow these elements here, okay, somehow these elements here somehow these elements here now, right, I'll be right back. Oh, give me a second, please. All right. This is interesting. But I do think it's because the way how this is works, you know, they put this display flex justify content and see, because as you can see, if this only is this, they opt into a different layout mode. That's why they actually make the things. So if you for some reason now doesn't do any of this, right, it say, hey, this block, which is now where the body is, they don't have any size, any dimension, as you can see here. So if you say, for example, the height, so the height is 100%, right? Or if you say like this, but this box, now that follow is the is that so somehow they're adding is some margin here. I don't know who is adding that kind of margin, or especially, okay, it doesn't have, okay, so now margin here is collapsing here. So elements like this now are collapsing here. So this, in this case, it means that this relative block actually behave as expected. If we don't put this thing here, right? And of course we make this, because for some reason now they are modifying. This is something internal. This is an internal design here. This is an internal design, right? But in any case, by default here, which is this. So by default, it's going to put now that element. If we, so for example, remove this class here as it is, right? By default, here is trying to now anchor that to that, right? So if you remove is the display here that is now passing to that's lovely. It actually doesn't work this way. Display justify content. Now they change that, so I can now modify this. That's lovely. If I say display as a block, now by default, when you follow the normal flow or the flow layout, this is what it's gonna do. All right, this is the flow layout here, and that makes a lot of sense. So of course, it's going to align all of these absolute elements to the origin, the top right corner of the screen, right? But if they now follow is a different layout mode, now here is centering elements in here. But that's quite interesting because at the end of the day, the anchoring here of these elements is based on, so it say that it is based on the positional layout. Exactly, the closest relative positional layout. So if I don't put this, it's going to put that elements at the top of that, right? Otherwise, it's going to put at the closest positioning layout here. That's right. That's right. And this actually doesn't change anything here. All right. So I just want to mention is this. So two, finally now, figuring out what is a containing block. In this game, you are giving a pair of HTML and CSS code snippet that describe a scene. This scene has an emoji puzzle pieces. Your job will be drag and drop each pieces onto the correct tile. Okay. Every square on the board represents 50-50 pixels area, and the pics fit perfectly. Each emoji puzzle piece has an implied width of 50-50 pixel style. Be sure to read both the HTML and the CSS snippet as a specific structure of the DOM. At the specific structure of the DOM will always be clear from the game board alone. Note, keep things concise. Non-critical CSS will be omitted. As always, the game can be navigated via keyword as well. While focus, the puzzle pieces can be moved with arrow keys. So if you have now this game, I can focus is here. That's interesting. All right. So it provides this accessibility. All right. And then you can now navigate to all of this, to all of this section. All right. And then access through the content. So here it say, hey, drag the rock.ship elements into the correct spot. If it say, hey, position absolute, top 0 on top right, it say top 0 and right 0. It is here, right? That's right. The other is the garden. Drag the tulip elements and bumblebee and the tree elements into the correct spot. So by reading here, it say, hey, the tulip, the bumblebee, and tree let's go to read this. It's a position relative of top 100 pixels and left 100. That's right. So it's saying, hey, this box, it'll be 100% pixel from left and right edges. And the tulip will be an absolute positioning on the top 50%, right? So by default, because it's going to align all of these elements here on the top left corner of that containing block, it say, hey, let's going to put it here, top 50%. It's gonna put these elements 50% down the top corner. Bumblebee is the same, but I'm gonna put now is on the top 50%. So say 50 and 50% of the left, right? And the tree, it is a position absolute, right? But now it's saying I'm gonna put it now at the bottom 50. This is at the bottom 50%, and the left 250. So 50, 100, 250, and this is where it's going to put this element here, right? Oh, on the left, my bad, exactly, on the left. What if I want to do this again? No. Okay. And again, freeway is now absolute positioning. It say, hey, the width is 500 pixels, the height is 200. I'm gonna put that on the top and bottom, all right, 0 and 0 pixels. I want to align this here, and I want to now align these elements to the top and the bottom to take all the available space here. So I'm centering is these elements in this absolute positioning. All of them are absolute, which means that the containing block of whatever style you're going to apply to these elements, it'll be it'll look up the closest containing block, the closest containing positions layout element. And in this case, in the case of truck, it's position absolute. Here it say the top is 0 and the left is 50, right? The tax is now position absolute. It say top 50, but right 100. So in other words, is here. And the helicopter is, hey, position absolute. By initially it put all of the elements at the top left of that containing, of the top left corner of that containing block. And then it say, hey, minus 100, all right, which is here. This is, yeah, right? So it's here, minus 100, and left 200, aka 100, 200 here. So you submit this. Oh, okay, it's counting from that. All right. This is a tricky question, and let's dig in.
So if you're looking at the supposed correct answer and thinking to yourself, that doesn't seem right, you are not alone. I've gotten a lot of feedback from people telling me that they think the correct answer is actually incorrect, that one of these pieces is in the wrong spot. And the correct answer is correct, but it can be really confusing. This is a legitimately tricky problem, so I want to walk through it and show why the correct answer is indeed correct. We have this absolutely positioned freeway, so this forms the containing block, and it wraps around all three children. So each of these children, because they're all set to position absolute, is going to be contained by this block. I always like to start by putting the pieces in the top left corner, because that's where they would sit by default, and then I can kind of adjust them as needed. And for the truck, we see that the top is 0, the left is 50, so we move it over by a single cell so that there's 50 pixels between the left edge of the truck and the left edge of the parent. Now for the taxi, I'll do the same thing. I'll put it here by default. We see that it has top 50 and right 100 pixels. And so for the top, we move it down by 1 position. But where should it go for the right? Should it go here, or should it go here? Well, let's suppose it was right 0. Where would the taxi go then?
So if with 0, it's going to put that there.
Well, it would sit right up against the right edge, so that the right edge of the taxi was touching the right edge of the containing block.
Exactly.
And so with that in mind, this would be right 50, and this would be right 100.
Exactly.
The key way to think about this is that if I have top 0, the element sits along the top. If I have left 0, it sits along the left. If I have bottom 0, it sits along the bottom, and right 0, it sits along the right. Whenever I anchor it to a side, the element always sits so that it is touching the wall of that containing block. And so it's not like we're counting from the left edge so that we think this should be 50 because the left edge of this box is 50 pixels from the left edge. It's always relative to whatever side it's anchored to. Now for the helicopter, and the helicopter is the one that has given people the most trouble, I see that it's position absolute, top minus 100, left 200. And so for left, we'll move it over by 4 cells, right? 50 times 4 is 200.
Exactly.
But then what do I do for this top minus 100? Well, again, if top 0 means that it's right here, so that the top edge of the helicopter touches the top edge of the freeway, then this would be top minus 50, and this would be top minus 100. A lot of people think that it should be here, like as in there should be 100 pixels between the helicopter and the freeway, but that assumes that the default position is here, where the helicopter would be outside the container. But if top was set to 0, it would sit right inside the container. And so we're always counting from this point of it being anchored within the container.
So we're counting is based on the position of the container there. So another is the containing puzzle. Disco Steve is having a night on the town. Position him accordingly. Disco Steve. So nightclub is margin top 50 and margin left 150. They don't using is any of the positioning layout algorithm. They're just going with this, right? Exactly, right? And because this is now position absolute, it's going to look up to the containing block. Nightclub doesn't have any positioning layout. It doesn't have any, it hasn't set any position layout here. So therefore, it's going to look up to the containing block. And because there is no more elements, it is the initial containing block, which is the root element here, aka what you do is this. Disco Steve is position absolute, bottom 0 and left 0. So it say, hey, it's going to sit now here, right? If you submit, my bad, Jesus, is bottom and left that as it is. The container is static, so it can contain absolute positioning children, and Disco Steven is having his own personal dance party over by the edge of the viewport. Exactly. And then you have now this. You have thrown the dart at the dartboard, but where did it stick? You have all of this, right? You have now ring, that is now padding 50, right? Ring 1, it's like it's ring. With this ring 2 is now a position relative of the element, and now have a sit index 2. The ring dot 3 is a position relative. Is that so? These two element or these two CSS rules, both of them have now they opt into the layout, the positioning layout relative, and then you have another dart. on sitting on the position absolute here, and the top 40%, right? 40%, and the left of 100%. So if you read this nested class here, right? So we'll say ring is padding 50, so ring 1 is padding 50, right? So it has a padding 50, okay? Ring 2 says, hey, I'm gonna opt into the relative position layout, aka I'm going to follow is the normal flow. I'm gonna put the ring 2, I'm gonna put the ring 2 above the other elements in seed index 2. Ring 3 say, hey, this is also a position layout, right? And then you have now ring 4, which I don't know, it doesn't do anything here. And then you have another dart, right? So dart, what it's going to look up is the closest containing block, aka in this case is ring 3, all right? Is ring 3, and it say, hey, I'm gonna put that in the 40% of that, right? So 40% of the ring 3, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if the 40% is this, you say, hey, this will be something like this, right? And with 100 left, aka is gonna put it is in here. So this is 0, this is 50, and this is 100. So it's gonna put this here, right? Okay. Okay. Okay, of course. Okay, this is 50 and this is 100. And then it's gonna put it there. Because dart is an absolute positioning, it will be contained by its closest ancestor, which is ring 3. It's the closest positioning ancestor, and it doesn't matter that ring.2 also set the index here. So our dart step is here. Exactly, so 40% of that is roughly this, right? So that's what I'm counting. Okay, 40% of that is roughly here. And then it's going to put that there. Help farmer John wrangle livestock. So you have farm, cook, and chicken. And farm is the position relative. Cook is on the position absolute, where you say, hey, the top and left is on the right. It's gonna put it there at the right of that containing block. That's right. At the right of containing block. And now chicken here, it say, hey, position absolute of that containing block, in this case cup, right? And I'm going to put that is 100% minus here. So in other words, this is 50 and this is 100. All right, from this bottom, and then you have another peg, which is position absolute, but here is going to look at the closest containing, which is now farm, position, the closest containing positioning, layout positioning elements. Okay, the closest containing, in this case of pig here, I'm going to look now at up to the closest positioning layout elements. In this case is farm, and farm is a relative. All right, so this element, since this is an absolute, I'm going to put now top 50 pixels, aka 0, 0, 50% from the top edge, And then on the right, it's gonna put it here on 50. So this is right 0 and on 50, right? And then the farmer. So farmer now live outside of the farm, all right? And because farmer class is going to look up for this element with this class, this layout algorithm is going to look for the closest positioning layout elements. Since there is no other containing that, it's going to take up the initial containing block, aka the HTML DOM, which means that it is here. So position absolute is 0, 0 this position, and now it sits on the top 50% and on the left 50%. And there you got it, right? So this follows the same logic as with the helicopter in the freeway round. The interesting thing about this example is that all three children appear to be contained by different elements. This is the real power of absolute position. We can stick things whenever we want here. Exactly. So hey, I can stick things whenever I want. I can stick things whenever this containing block exists or is around to. Containing the puzzle, the sky and the field, drag the UFO and code block of the correct spot. Again, you have the sky, you have the field, these two HTML elements. So the sky, say, and the field is position relative, aka it follows the normal flow in this case, in this orderly fashion, one after the another. All right. But now the UFO and the code class, the cow class, say, hey, UFO is now absolute to that containing closest positioning element. In this case is the sky, right? And then it say, hey, the right will be 200 pixels. So in other words, this is initially put it here. The top is 0. The right is 200 pixels. So you say, hey, this is 0, 50, 100, 200, 150, and 200, right? And then the bottom is 0 pixels, all right? So it enters into some sort of dichotomy, like how can it be here on the bottom and then on the top, right? The width is 50 pixels, and you are telling to this element to now make the margin top and the margin auto to take all the available space in the top and in the border, aka centering these elements here. And in the case of the cow, you say, hey, this is now position absolute, aka it starts with the closest containing position layout element, the field in this case. All right. And it say, hey, the top will be minus 50. And from the left, you're gonna push 250 pixels. So this is 0, this is 0, 0, this is minus 50 and 0 from the left, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, and this is it. UFO is anchoring 200 pixels away from the right edge, and it is vertically centering in the middle row using auto margin trick. Our cow rises above its container due to negative top value here. It is a golf day. Position the piece based on the CSS provide. So you have flag, hole, and ball, right? Green, flag, holes, and ball. The green is say position absolute. Inset 50%. In other words, is adding is okay 50% in all directions. 50% in all directions. The flag is relative, the hole is position, and the ball is position. So when you don't specify any property here, right? It now the position here of the flag, it is set here. The whole position in absolute, it is now here, right? And in the ball position is going to anchor to the green, which is something like this. Why is that? Because whole at the end of the day is
So at first, it doesn't seem like this should be a particularly difficult question. There's only 5 CSS declarations and a relatively simple DOM structure. But the thing that makes this one tricky is how things combine when we talk about different elements that use different values for position. Now, if I ignore all of this CSS and I focus just on the DOM structure, I have this div class green that contains the 3 children, and so in flow layout, I would expect them all to stack vertically in the top left corner of the parent, right? Block level elements don't like to share horizontal space, and so they're going to stack like this. Now, looking at the CSS that affects them, we see that our flag has position relative, which means that it's going to inherit its position from flow layout, and it's going to stay right where it is. I haven't set top, left, right, or bottom, and so we're not sliding it around at all. For the second child, the whole, it's been given absolute positioning, but I haven't tried to anchor it to the top, or the bottom, or the right. And so, because it has no anchor, it's going to sit right where it would if it was using flow layout. It inherits its default flow layout. But even though it doesn't affect where the whole sits, it does still have an effect on the overall solution, because when I give something position absolute, I take it out of flow, which means that its siblings are going to ignore that this element exists. And so, for the ball...
Okay. So when you set now the anchoring of this positioning is when now you take those elements out of the normal flow. But without it,
which, no. By the way, this should be a golf ball. There is no golf ball emoji, so I apologize for the strangeness of a soccer ball in a golf context. But yeah, this golf ball is going to act like the whole doesn't exist, and so it's going to sit right below the flag because it also uses relative positioning, which means that it uses the standard flow layout. What that means is that the ball and the hole sit in the exact same spot, which means we've gotten a hole in one.
Holy moly. Okay. And the exercise here, bubble or border. Absolute positioning can be very useful when it comes to creating whimsical flourish. Let's create a bubble border. New and improve here. All right, new and improve here. Okay, I do think I'm gonna leave this as it is. Take care. Bye bye.